When Marvin Gaye's voice fell silent, the world lost a soul that poured every ounce of pain, love, and truth into music. After his tragic death, when the door of his room was finally opened, no one was prepared for what lay inside. It wasn't just the space of a music legend, it held something that froze everyone in place. To this day, the shocking discovery remains one of the most talked about mysteries surrounding his life and death. Stay with us to know what exactly they find in there. The fatal altercation unfolds. Marvin Pence Gaye Jr. was one of the most influential figures in American music. Known as the Prince of Soul, he shaped the sound of Motown in the 1960s and 1970s with his unique blend of gospel roots, smooth delivery, and socially conscious themes. Raised in Washington, D.C., Marvin grew up singing in his father's church and later performed with doo-wop groups before stepping into a solo career that produced timeless songs such as I Heard It Through the Grapevine, What's Going On, Let's Get It On, and Sexual Healing. His voice carried both vulnerability and strength, making him one of the defining artists of his generation. By the mid-1970s, after achieving massive success, Marvin purchased a Tudor-style house in Los Angeles, a residence originally built in 1905 and designed by Sumner Hunt. Although he bought the property in 1975 for $30,500, his struggles with drugs and deepening financial problems forced him to sign the house over to his parents less than 2 years later. Despite this setback, Marvin continued to live there with his family, and it became the home where the final chapter of his life unfolded. Marvin Gaye's relationship with his parents was often strained, especially with his father, Marvin Gaye Sr. His father was a strict preacher with an uncompromising outlook, and their bond was filled with conflict as well as moments of closeness. Gaye's mother, Alberta, on the other hand, was a source of warmth and support. She often tried to shield him from the harsher side of his father's temper. Gaye once admitted that much of his lifelong struggle with inner turmoil and self-doubt stemmed from trying to win his father's approval while leaning on his mother for comfort. This tension created a fragile balance in the household that followed him into adulthood. Tragically, this fragile balance collapsed on April 1st, 1984. That day, a heated argument broke out between Marvin's parents. The tension escalated, and Marvin stepped in to protect his mother during the fight. This intervention turned violent as Marvin confronted his father, Marvin Gaye Sr. In the heat of the moment, Gaye Sr. retrieved a .38 caliber revolver, a gun Marvin had once given him as a gift, and fired at his son. The first bullet struck Marvin in the chest, tearing through vital organs. A second shot hit his shoulder. Despite being rushed to the hospital, Marvin was pronounced dead at 1:01 p.m., just one day before his 45th birthday. Let's now tell you what happened when the police arrived and take you inside his room, and the details will bring tears to your eyes. Inside the haunted room. When police arrived at the Los Angeles home, the atmosphere was filled with a silence that reflected the weight of what had just taken place. Officers moved carefully through the residence until they reached Marvin Gaye's room. What they found revealed the tragic outcome of the confrontation between father and son. The space showed visible signs of a violent struggle, and investigators quickly secured the revolver that had been used. Later, forensic reports confirmed that the bullet had passed through Marvin's lungs, heart, and several other vital organs, leaving no possibility of survival. The revolver itself carried a haunting detail. It was legally registered, but had originally been given as a gift by Marvin to his father. That fact was noted immediately by investigators and became one of the more unsettling aspects of the case. Marvin Sr. was taken into custody without resistance. Witness accounts described him as confused and subdued, a stark contrast to the violent event that had just occurred. At the same time, Marvin's mother, Alberta, was devastated, recounting the fight that had broken out earlier and her son's desperate effort to protect her. Investigators worked with precision, documenting everything they saw. They gathered physical evidence, photographed the scene, and interviewed family members to reconstruct the sequence of events. The facts pointed to a heartbreaking reality. Marvin Gaye, whose music had inspired and comforted millions, had lost his life in his own home in a moment shaped by long-standing family tensions. One detail stood out during the investigation. The .38 caliber revolver used in the shooting was not found immediately on the floor or near the crime scene. According to reports, it was discovered beneath the pillow on Marvin Sr.'s bed. In some accounts, it was retrieved either by his daughter-in-law or by Alberta herself, who then took it outside and left it on the lawn just as police arrived. That detail gave investigators insight into how quickly the household reacted after the shooting. Witnesses, including Alberta, described a clash that involved Marvin striking and kicking his father before the shooting took place. Investigators later confirmed these reports through visible bruises and other testimony, which helped them piece together the tense moments leading to the fatal shots. The official timeline recorded that police reached the house about 20 minutes after the shooting. Marvin was transported quickly to California Hospital Medical Center. Despite their efforts, he was declared dead on arrival at 1:01 p.m. The precision of the investigation preserved every detail of that timeline, ensuring clarity about the final moments. As the police explored Marvin's room, they uncovered silent witnesses to his inner battles, and what the toxicology report later revealed confirmed the heartbreaking truth about his state of mind. The revelations of the autopsy. When the autopsy results came out, they shed light on Marvin Gaye's final hours and offered a window into the struggles that had been hidden behind his fame. The doctors confirmed that Marvin had cocaine in his system, and some reports also pointed to traces of PCP. These substances likely affected his mood, his judgment, and even his awareness of what was happening around him that day. But the findings went deeper than toxicology. They revealed the weight Marvin had been carrying for years. He had long battled depression, a condition that grew worse under the relentless pressure of his career. The constant demands of touring, performing, and living under public scrutiny pushed him into a corner where he struggled to cope. For those who only saw his talent and charisma, it was hard to imagine the pain that lived inside him. The evidence also added a haunting layer to what he allegedly said as he lay dying. Marvin's brother later recalled his words, "I got what I wanted. I couldn't do it myself, so I had him do it. It's good. I ran my race. There's no more left in me." These were not the words of someone caught in a moment of sudden rage. They reflected exhaustion, surrender, and perhaps even a sense of release. To him, the end was not just a tragedy, but also a conclusion to battles he could no longer fight. Reports tell that before his death, he was convinced that someone was trying to kill him. He had even taken to wearing a bulletproof vest when not on stage. And at one press conference, he announced that he had been poisoned by an unknown individual and then later saved by an antidote potion that had been created by comedian Dick Gregory. The autopsy showed that Marvin may not have been fully aware of his actions or surroundings on the day of the shooting. Drugs, depression, and mental strain had created a storm inside him that clouded his ability to respond clearly. This context became central to how people later understood his death. It was not just about an argument with his father. It was about years of inner conflict that had left him vulnerable, unstable, and searching for an escape. These revelations shaped the way the case was seen. The shooting could no longer be explained simply as a deliberate act of violence. Instead, the narrative grew more complicated. It suggested that Marvin himself may have played a part in how events unfolded, not by planning them, but by being in a state of mind where the line between life and death had blurred. For the public, and for those close to him, this made the tragedy even harder to process. It was not just the loss of a gifted artist, but the story of a man who, despite all his success, never found peace. The findings also raised questions about how much of Marvin's later behavior was influenced by his reliance on substances. Did the drugs make his depression worse? Did they magnify his despair? These were questions that could never be answered with certainty, but the autopsy results made clear that his physical and mental health had been deeply connected to the choices he made in his final years. What the doctors uncovered did not erase the grief of his passing, but it provided a painful clarity. Marvin's death was not simply the outcome of a violent family dispute. It was the culmination of a long struggle with addiction, pressure, and depression. Yet, the case took another shocking turn when an unsettling discovery about Marvin Sr. came to light, changing everything that followed. The tumor that shifted the case. In May 1984, only a few weeks after the death of Marvin Gaye, an unexpected medical discovery about his father added a new layer to the already complicated case. Doctors revealed that Marvin Gaye Sr. had a benign brain tumor about the size of a walnut lodged at the base of his brain. This was not cancerous, but its presence carried serious implications. On May 17th, he underwent surgery to have it removed, a procedure that immediately drew attention from both legal experts and the public following the trial. The tumor was an important development because it introduced questions about Marvin Sr.'s state of mind and his ability to fully control his actions. Although the growth was not malignant, doctors explained that such tumors could affect memory, decision-making, and overall judgment depending on their size and location. This meant that at the very time of the shooting, Marvin Sr. might not have been acting with the same clarity as a healthy individual. The revelation did not erase the tragedy of Marvin Gaye's death, but it complicated the way responsibility would be viewed in the courtroom. For prosecutors, this discovery created a challenge. Their case had originally rested on the idea that Marvin Sr. knowingly and deliberately shot his son during an argument, but the presence of a brain tumor made that claim less straightforward. Could they prove intent beyond doubt if medical evidence suggested his mental state was compromised? For the defense, however, the tumor was a crucial point. It allowed them to argue that Marvin Sr. was not entirely in control of his actions, and therefore should not be judged as harshly as someone who had planned the act with a clear and stable mind. From a legal perspective, the tumor was a turning point. It gave the defense leverage and shifted how the judge and jury would have to evaluate Marvin Sr.'s responsibility. The emphasis was no longer only on the violent act itself, but also on the physical and medical factors that may have shaped it. Still, the court had to determine his fitness for trial. Let's tell you, what did those evaluations conclude? Competency and plea deals. By June 1984, after evaluations and hearings, a judge ultimately declared Marvin Gaye Sr. competent for trial. This ruling meant that despite his health issues, he was considered able to understand the charges and participate in his defense. At first, prosecutors moved forward with a charge of first-degree murder, the most serious accusation possible. This decision reflected the gravity of a son losing his life at the hands of his father. However, the path through court was far from straightforward. Evidence from the autopsy and from the scene itself complicated the prosecution's case. The autopsy revealed not only the fatal wounds, but also bruises on Marvin Jr.'s body. Photographs documenting the bruises became an important piece of the record. They supported the argument that Marvin Sr. acted in a heated moment after being struck by his son. In legal terms, this opened the possibility of manslaughter rather than premeditated murder. The defense leaned heavily on this evidence, arguing that the shooting occurred during a sudden and emotional outburst rather than through careful planning. By September 1984, the case took a decisive turn. Instead of continuing toward a high-profile murder trial, the prosecution agreed to accept a plea deal. On September 20th, Marvin Gaye Sr. entered a plea of no contest to voluntary manslaughter. This plea meant that he did not admit guilt outright, but also did not dispute the evidence presented. For the court, it provided a resolution without the uncertainty and emotional toll of a full trial for murder. The decision was controversial, but understandable given the circumstances. What could have been a drawn-out and deeply divisive murder trial ended with a negotiated plea. The legal outcome. On November 20th, 1984, Judge Gordon Ringer delivered his decision in the case against Marvin Gaye Sr. The courtroom had been tense for months, as every hearing drew attention from reporters and fans who wanted to understand how the justice system would handle such a tragic and complicated case. Marvin Sr. had already been declared competent to stand trial despite health concerns, and his plea to voluntary manslaughter was accepted earlier in September. All that remained was to see how the sentencing would unfold. Judge Ringer handed down a 6-year suspended sentence and placed Marvin Sr. on 5 years of probation. In addition, the court permanently prohibited him from owning firearms or consuming alcohol. For many, this outcome seemed surprisingly lenient given the charge and the weight of the case. The courtroom absorbed the ruling in silence before voices of shock began circulating outside. Observers expected a harsher punishment for taking the life of one of music's most beloved figures, even under circumstances clouded by illness and a volatile family conflict. Prosecutors had already adjusted the charge after reviewing the autopsy report, which showed bruises on Marvin Jr.'s body from their altercation and highlighted his impaired state due to drug use. Coupled with evidence of Marvin Sr.'s brain tumor, the court recognized that the situation was not one of premeditated intent, but rather a tragic escalation within the household. Still, many in the public question how such considerations could lead to an outcome that seemed more symbolic than punitive. During the trial proceedings, both sides emphasized the heavy toll the case had taken. The defense pointed out Marvin Sr.'s poor health, his advancing age, and his lack of prior violent criminal history. They argued that lengthy imprisonment would not serve justice, but instead compound the family's suffering. The prosecution, while pressing for accountability, acknowledged the complexities that made the case far from straightforward. In the end, Judge Ringer's ruling seemed to place more weight on the family tragedy than on strict punishment. For Marvin Sr., the verdict meant a life outside prison walls, but under tight restrictions and constant scrutiny. He returned to a quieter existence, though he could never escape the shadow of what had happened. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the world was reeling. Let's take a look. How did fans and the public mourned over the loss of a legend? Shockwaves and silence. The news of Marvin Gaye's death sent a chill across the world. Because it came on April 1st, many people first thought it was nothing more than a cruel April Fool's prank. How could a man whose voice had defined soul music be gone so suddenly? Yet, as the reports continued to spread, disbelief turned into grief. The truth was hard to accept. Marvin Gaye was gone, taken at just 44. In the days that followed, the shock gave way to visible sorrow. Fans from across the country and beyond made their way to California to say goodbye. At Forest Lawn Cemetery, the crowd of mourners grew into the thousands. Reports estimate that nearly 10,000 people came, lining up to pay their respects. For many, the funeral was not only about honoring Marvin as an artist, but also about recognizing the personal connection they felt to his music. His songs had soundtracked their lives, songs of love, hope, and struggle, and now they came to offer something in return: gratitude and farewell. The service drew not only fans but also peers from the world of music. Smokey Robinson, who had known Marvin for years, stood among the mourners. He said, "Marvin and I were brothers, man. We hung out almost every day of our lives. To lose him at that age was a real blow. The last thing I ever expected to see was him dead." His words reflected the shock that rippled through the Motown family. On tour in Australia when the news arrived, Otis described the moment as devastating. "It was a very dark day that I will never forget as the day I lost a friend." At the funeral, Stevie Wonder performed a song of his own creation, Lighting Up the Candle, and spoke directly to Marvin's memory. "Many times in the last few days, I have tried to cry, but there are no tears. I just smiled because I know of those moments of joy with Marvin." He added, "Marvin was the person who encouraged me that the music I had within me, I must feel free to let come out." Jermaine Jackson from the Jackson 5 also paid tribute, saying that Marvin had been an inspiration to him and his brothers. Jackson remembered Marvin as someone whose music shaped the sound of Motown and inspired younger artists to pursue their own path with honesty and passion. Marvin was not just another artist in the industry, he was a friend, a fellow traveler in the journey of music, someone who had broken barriers and set new standards for soul and R&B. Yet even as the world mourned his artistry, another story was unfolding. Behind the curtain of grief lay the question of his legacy and the troubled state of his estate. How would Marvin's music, debts, and memory be carried forward? The estate and its renewal. Reports revealed that Marvin's estate carried a staggering $1.9 million in debt at the time of his death. This included $600,000 in unpaid taxes and $300,000 in alimony. For a man who had been one of Motown's brightest stars, this financial state was both surprising and deeply troubling. It showed how personal struggles and financial pressures had quietly taken their toll, even as his music continued to inspire millions. The responsibility to sort through this overwhelming situation fell partly on his son. Marvin Gaye III, only 17 years old at the time, became co-administrator of the estate. It was an enormous responsibility for someone so young, stepping into adulthood while carrying the weight of his father's legacy and the shadow of enormous debt. The legal and financial process was not simple, and it would take years before the estate found any balance. The challenge was immense, but what happened next was proof of Marvin's lasting influence. While the debts looked crushing, there was one powerful force that continued to bring hope: his music. The songs he had written and recorded still resonated deeply with audiences around the world. Royalties from his work began to flow back into the estate, turning despair into renewal. Over time, these royalties helped shift the financial picture. The very creations that had made Marvin a legend became the key to restoring stability. The estate that once seemed buried under debt gradually recovered, thanks to the enduring value of his music. It was not an overnight process, but it was steady. Each time his records were played, purchased, or celebrated, they contributed to healing the financial wounds he had left behind. This transformation held a deeper meaning. While his life ended in tragedy, his art carried on, creating a form of renewal that money alone could not explain. It was not just about paying back debts or managing assets. It was about ensuring that his name and his music would remain alive for future generations. His estate, though scarred by the weight of debt, became a symbol of how creativity can outlast hardship. Marvin's story reminds us that a legacy is not only measured by material wealth, but by the impact left on people's hearts. Though he had left the world with heavy debts, he also left songs that no financial statement could ever measure. His estate's recovery through music royalties shows the remarkable power of art to sustain memory and rebuild what seemed lost. Do you think Marvin ever found the peace he was searching for? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what his music means to you.